Before we get to the Grateful Dead, I got a new hat this weekend. Just came back from Levitation Fest in Austin. Absolutely bonkers amazing. Pavement, Built to Spill, Mastodon, TV on the Radio, Blood Incantation, The Black Angels. Just epic, epic. I mean, that's just scratching the surface of what I saw. But the best band, or at least my favorite set of the weekend, Unknown Mortal Orchestra. And so much so that I had to buy an Unknown Mortal Orchestra hat, hence the new hat. Their set was amazing. I think Ruben just threw out the set list, if he ever has a set list, and it was just an hour of just nonstop Ruben-esque type jamming. Fantastic, fantastic. If you have a chance to see Unknown Mortal Orchestra on this tour, do it, because Ruben is in top form right now. All right, on to the Grateful Dead. What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the opinionated hippie, with some Grateful Dead ranting and raving today about a recent release they recently released. In their recent archival release series, as they've sort of revisited their post-Americana albums and done their Grateful Dead record albums, Mars Hotel, Eyes of the World one, Wake of the Flood, and now Blues for Allah. They have these digital only. I don't think you can actually buy a hard copy, but they're also, anytime I've seen them talked about in any form, the fact that you can stream them seems to be encouraged by the Dead, though I know you can buy like a digital copy on their website. A series called The Angels Share, which are previously unreleased studio jams and studio sessions and outtakes and stuff like that. And the other two have been fantastic. And this one is also fantastic, the one for Blues for Allah. It's about an hour and a half long. And the argument that the Dead were not, this puts to rest the argument, or maybe helps refire the argument, that the Dead were not a studio band. They were good in the studio. What they were not good at is taking what they did in the studio and putting it forth as an album. So once production choices were made and editing choices were made and overdubs were made, that's where things went wrong. But when you get them in the studio and they just jam and work on ideas, and maybe Blues for Allah, maybe this era from like 73 to 76 or 75 was just special. That's why we're getting the Angels' share of these albums. But this thing is fantastic. It is a whole bunch of tracks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 tracks. Only one of them has lyrics, vocals, and I think we get 2 lines of Franklin's Tower. The rest of it is all instrumental versions of pretty much every song. I think every song that would appear on Blues for Allah. We get them sequenced from February 75 to July 75. So as you go through the listen, you get the February tracks and the March tracks and the April tracks. I think they're in the studio every month in this time. You get to see them work out all the songs that would appear on Blues for Allah. You get to see them pretty much just jam these ideas. And then there's a couple other jams that bear no relation to any song that is on those albums, or really just studio jams. It is an absolutely fantastic listen that I highly recommend. And I'm going to go through the songs, and because it's not perfect, there are a couple things on here where, like, at an hour and a half, there's probably about, 10 to 15 minutes that maybe could have been trimmed, and I don't think it would hurt this album in any way. But they're not that bad. They're just like, okay, this was interesting if you're really into the Dead. I am a hardcore Deadhead. I am someone who followed the Dead, make videos about the Dead, have Dead boot, all that stuff. So my enjoyment is probably going to be, I don't know, because I've heard so much Dead, yet at the same time, this still scratches that itch. But at the same time, I'm also somebody who likes those 25-minute jams that might go nowhere. So I don't know. I'm trying to like give you a sense of the how much you should weigh my words, but I'm a hardcore Deadhead. So this is coming from somebody who absolutely loves this band and loves long, pointless jams. So yeah, I'm going to talk about this thing, not play music from it, just ran it, kind of encourage you to get it, because I think it is a pretty fascinating look into one of their better albums. Easily, Blues for Allah, I think, has to rank as one of their top 5 albums. If you disclude the live stuff, a top 3 album. So fantastic, fantastic stuff. And there's probably, out of all of these, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 5 jams, each of which is like around more than 8 minutes long, that kind of make this worth it. So there's like a good 45 minutes worth of music that, even if the other stuff is maybe a little more for the hardcore fan, that 45 minutes, I think it kind of makes it worth a listen. It opens up with a track called Distorto, which has this awesome sort of arpeggiated sort of progression riff that just kind of gets repeated, kind of a little more psyche, a little more heavier, a little more distorted, hence the name Distorto. Though I do think that the name Distorto, while it does specifically refer to the sound of Jerry's guitar, it kind of refers to the overall vibe of this 8+ minute jam. But this sort of like riff, like a maybe a little bit darker version of Mind Left Body Jam. Like Jerry just establishes this, he runs through it a couple times, and then he just like, jumps in and starts soloing and just takes off. It is like an intensely chill psych space jam that you could easily see in the middle of like a 74 playing in the band. All of a sudden, Jerry just starts playing this riff, and the Dead just goes off for, who knows how long. It's that kind of vibe. It definitely has, you can see the connection from 74 and the way they would just jam out these things to kind of some of the things they were doing in 76 and 77. It's just absolutely amazing. The sound is amazing. Listening to this on earbuds, the separation of the instruments is beautiful. You can hear Keith's work is fantastic. Some really tasty keyboard work in here. Bob's a little buried a lot of times in what he's doing, and I think he was mostly on my left side. Jerry's pretty prominent and just so clear. The drummer, it just really good listen on all fronts. But this opening jam is just amazing. It kind of sounds like something that would come out of a play-in, or even because Crazy Fingers is on this album, and eventually Crazy Fingers would kind of lead into some interesting things, or interesting things would lead into Crazy Fingers. It does seem like a kind of psych jam that could somehow be connected to like a play-in, this Crazy Fingers vibe. But it's 8 minutes of just an amazing way to kick off this release. Next, we get 2 tracks that explore Stronger Than Dirt. The first track is called Proto 18 Proper, which is about 2 minutes of them just kind of messing around with Stronger Than Dirt. And then the next track, Stronger Than Dirt, is about a 9.5 minute exploration of this. Phil is pretty locked into that Stronger Than Dirt riff almost the entire time, which is unusual for Phil, but he's pretty locked in. And it really takes about 3.5 minutes before Jerry starts to like, okay, I'm going to go off and start soloing. The whole thing is pretty chill. It definitely doesn't have the intensity that Distorto has. The sound on Jerry's guitar is a little bit thinner, but it's still got some energy. It's interesting to see how strong, if Stronger Than Dirt had stayed as like a regular in the repertoire, what they maybe would have done with it, like jam wise. So it's interesting from that standpoint. And Stronger Than Dirt isn't really here. It's really just Phil playing that little bass riff and then jamming over that. We get an 11.5 minute The Music Never Stopped, which no vocals. You could sing along to parts of it. It's not completely locked in as the song eventually would be, but you hear the verses, you hear the choruses, you hear kind of the little riffs in the ending jam, but they're all kind of like, there's a very fluidity to it where you're like, oh, they usually don't go into this part, and then we're back into this part, and then looks like Jerry's going to wrap it up as they do at the end, but then we go back into this part. And so they're really messing around with the various parts of The Music Never Stop for an 11.5 minutes. And Jerry is soloing a lot. He's soloing where there's verses, where there's choruses, where there's a bridge, where there's a transition, where there's a jam. We don't really get that deep, deep space. We're kind of free-falling Music Never Stop jam that we would get in a live scenario. But nonetheless, this is pretty cool. And just to have it done over those chords and those progressions, and you're like, oh yeah, come on, children, come on, tap your hand. And Jerry's just tearing off licks. It's pretty good. Pretty good 11.5 minutes. Next, we get The only studio chatter we really have, other than a brief little comment in Franklin's Tower, sandcastles and glass camels. They explore this for about 2 minutes. It's a 4.5 minute track, 4 minute track. They explore it for 2 minutes and then they stop. And Jerry starts going off about what a cool idea this progression is, or this rhythmic pattern, and that how they can like use it at different lengths and jumping off parts. And he was like, his comment was like, yeah, it was really cool. And I didn't know what to do. And then nothing changed. So I decided to change it. And that's how I just approached the song. And just the way Jerry talks about the jamming, and then Bob's coming in from a more technical aspect. And it's interesting to see how these two approaches to music would, ultimately produce what we get with the Dead. But just to hear Jerry Garcia just, yeah, like I was feeling like I should just stay in this groove until nobody else changed. Then I decided to change it. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much the Dead in a nutshell right there when they're at their best. But that's neat. And it's really only happens in this one track. I could have, if Jerry's going to speak this sort of Jerry-esquely, more often, I want, if he does this more, I wish they would release more of these, but apparently maybe he didn't. Next, we get a jam into Blues for Allah. Jam is super interesting. It's got the chords for Lost Sailor, except they're not really, we don't get the resolution at the end. It's like a dun-dun-dun, but we don't get the dun-dun-dun-na, we don't get that last chord, and then the dun-dun-dun-na, but we get the dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun-na. Like we get like almost Lost Sailor, but not enough to actually be Lost Sailor. And they jam around this Lost Sailor idea for a while. And then they go into this more like skippy, bouncy, kind of Eyes of the World feel for a while. And then this is like a 6.5 minute track. Then right around the 5 minute mark, you all of a sudden get that Blues for Allah, kind of deep, ominous riff that comes in, but with way more energy. The band's kind of going full speed ahead, and I think it's Jerry that all of a sudden is like, plays the darkness, but the band doesn't kind of like put on the brakes and like coalesce around that sludgier riff. They just kind of jam around it. Interesting look at what Blues for Allah could have possibly been had it stayed in the set list in some form, had like an instrumental version of it been locked in. But a really, really interesting, fascinating listen. But to hear those Lost Sailor chords early on, it's like, oh, they were toying around with that for some years before Bob dropped it. Then we get a surf jam, which is amazing. The opening riff that Jerry's playing, it's almost like he's slacked down all the strings and they're super steely, and he's just like scraping them to make it this like steely surf vibe. Awesome energy. There's this, I think it's Bob, or maybe it is Jerry, does this almost Caution-esque type, like strumming of the chords that kind of reminds me of Caution, but this like upbeat energy, this sort of propulsive drive, this early, very surf sound versus this like Caution-esque late 60s jam energy. Fantastic listen. Like the band could jam in the studio. The problem is not that they were a bad studio jam and that they needed an audience. The problem was they didn't take things like Surf Jam and drop that on an album in some way, shape, or form. That's the problem. Next, we get Crazy Fingers, which really, this is a 6.5 minute track. You really only hear Crazy Fingers for the last 13 seconds. I think it's 6 minutes and 13 seconds. It's like the 6 minute mark where all of a sudden it's the do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Other than that, it's a jam. It's a jam that sounds like it's a playing into this idea that kind of hints at Crazy Fingers, but then eventually go into Crazy Fingers. It's a really cool jam. Almost sounds, actually, doesn't even sound like a post-playing band jam. It sounds like a post-trucking jam because it's got a little spoonful energy, a little hint of the blues in there. You kind of feel like Jerry's just going like, don't, got that little spoonful vibe. Really cool jam. Jerry soloing is fantastic. Goes on for like 6 minutes. It's got a nice bounce to it. Definitely doesn't have that sort of psych energy that Crazy Fingers has. Really, really cool, interesting jam. Does sound like a post-trucking type thing. Then we get several versions of Help Slip, Franklin's and Help Slip. We get a really fast run through of Help Slip. It's about 4 minutes long. Really kind of like The chords are there, the ideas are there, the segues are there, the runs are there, but they're like racing through this thing. Jerry's soloing his way through it. We get to like the end of Help and into Slipknot, and Joey's like, like just running through those things at a breakneck pace. It's kind of exhilarating, kind of fun, but you can tell they haven't yet figured out quite what they want to do with the song. Then we get two versions. Then we get a Franklin's Tower, and this was probably the only track on here. I'm like, not sure we needed this. Maybe we could have. It's about 7.5 minutes long. Maybe the first 2 minutes is all we needed because they're pretty much just playing the groove, the dun, 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 and then they stop it, and Jerry's like, "That was a good groove, right? That's the right groove." And then they go back into it, and kind of not much happens for the rest of like the 5 minutes. There is this neat little, I think it's a Bob that's doing it. He's pretty buried in the mix, but he seems to maybe be mixed more up front for this. That sounds like the China Rider segue, that little Bob solo riff that he plays as they segue from China Cat into I Know You Rider. There's something that resembles that at the end of the jam that's pretty interesting, but this is the one track where I'm like, a little too much of them just treading water with an idea and not really going anywhere or shedding any real light on anything. Then we get two versions of Help Slip that are pretty much complete. One is like a 7.5 minute, 7 close to 8 minute version. That's pretty much an instrumental take on Help Slip, Help on the Way into Slipknot. We get a nice Slipknot jam. It's a more straightforward jam. Bob's chords tend to bear more of a connection to Help on the Way than they do in those more out there Slipknot jams. And then when they get to the end, it just kind of falls apart and ends. But it's really interesting. The energy is good. You can tell they have all the parts fleshed out. The tempo is back to the tempo we expect. And it's just nice to hear Jerry just kind of going off for like 8 minutes. Then we get a shorter version of that that's about 3 minutes long. We get a really quick intro into Help, like maybe a verse, a chorus. Then we get a solo. In both these versions of Help on the Way, that solo spot is defined as it would be in the studio version and all other like live versions. So they've come to the point where they know what they want to do with it. And then when we get to Slipknot, it kind of fades out. So the second version we might not have needed, though it is nice to hear two Jerry Help on the Way solos. Then we get a King Solomon's Marbles, which is pretty complete. Everything seems to be done like we get like every idea once, and then we go on to Jerry solo in, then we get the next idea with those middle changes. Jerry's got some really good licks at the end that did not make the final version that are really cool. A nice way, and that's all of the Blues for All. I kind of feel like it should have ended at this point. They tacked on two other songs that were from the same sessions as King Solomon's Marbles, but one of them would end up on a Jerry album. They love each other. The other one would end up on a Bob Weir album. Was it a Bob Weir album or a Kingfisher album? Was that the name of it? Was it a Bobby and the Midnights album? But Lazy Lightning Supplication. It was Bobby and the Midnights, right? I don't remember. Not listened to solo Weir in a long time. But anyways, They Love Each Other is the slow version. They know it. They're running through it. Not really sure there's anything new that's shed on this song other than the fact that maybe they were considered dropping it on a Dead album, which I don't think. I'm glad they didn't put it on Blues for Allah. I think Blues for Allah is, I like They Love Each Other. I love They Love Each Other. My wife and I put that song on our wedding CD that we passed out on our guests. So that was one of my picks, not hers. And then the Lazy Lightning Supplication is a lot of Bob. I'm not even sure Jerry's present in this. Early on, it seems like he plays a couple licks, but then I think he drops out. This might be Bob showing the song to the band. It feels kind of early, feels kind of rushed, but it's there, Lazy Lightning. The Supplication, we don't really get like a monster jam or anything. But I kind of feel like we didn't need those last two. I kind of wish they just stuck with the Blues for Allah stuff, knowing that these songs wouldn't end up on that album. I think Lazy Not Lightning Supplication maybe could have fit on Blues for Allah musically more than the overall vibe of They Love Each Other. But I think the album is pretty darn good as it is. But I recommend this. I think this was a really good listen. I super enjoyed it. And I think it's starting off with Distorto. Like, I want to put it on again because that opening jam is absolutely amazing. And just that riff, that opening vamp, kind of reminds me of something. Can't remember what it is. It's got a Mind Left Body jam vibe, but it's definitely not that. But anyways, yeah, that's all I got. Thanks for watching. go listen to this album. It's a good hang. Peace. Subscribe, like, share, comment, do those things, and peace. Talk to you later.